I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll talk about the TJ Searcy commitment over the 4th of July weekend here. The Big Ten makes a big move. SEC will go over. We've had this table for a couple of weeks now, but we're finally getting to it. We'll go with SEC odds to win the conference, and we'll go over SEC over-unders for the 2022 season. Will, hey, I saw you and Gator Dave did a magazine episode too, so you've been all in preview mode here in the last 48 hours, Will.
Yeah, man, we've been talking about NIL and recruiting and all that sort of stuff for a while. It was nice to kind of sit back and talk a little bit about football. That is sort of the sport. We are trying to be football analysts. That was one of the cool parts about the magazine, though, right? We spent probably a month really putting hard work into that to get that done. A couple of months, really. And, a lot of people have given us feedback on that one, but specifically that was targeted at football. So then we took a month and spent that talking about recruiting. And now I think, now that we're in July, it's time to switch back and time to start talking about positions and players and all that sort of stuff. Of course, two bits is a recruit, but after that, it's football at this point.
Man, I can't back you up enough on that, because as much as we have to, the NIL stuff is a part of the changing landscape. And if you want to keep up with the sport, you have to understand what's going on in the NIL front. So we talk about it, but man, am I glad to be just talking about some football stuff here today. We'll jump right into two bits. TJ Searcy commits to the program. He's a defensive lineman out of Thomaston, Georgia. I believe he goes to Upson Lee High School, 6'5", 250. You see him as a guy coming off the edge here at the college level. Mike Peterson was a key factor in the recruitment. He told Gators Online, Searcy told Gators Online, he was pretty much letting me know I could come into their defense and make an impact right away. Mike P is a great dude. He knows so much about the game. He's an actual legend in Gainesville. Searcy continued, they pretty much want to use me to get sacks. They don't really see me dropping a lot. And he addressed that specifically because if you look at the highlights, this kid's all over the field. I mean, 6'5", 250, you're already an actual monster at the high school level. Anyway, on top of that, this is a super athletic guy coming in and really kind of fitting the type of mold that we're seeing in some of these guys coming off the edge here in Billy Napier's system here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, he's 153rd ranked overall national recruit. The highest recruit who's committed thus far to Billy Napier's 2023 class. Obviously, we want to see higher guys commit, but 150 guys who are ranked 150th pan out quite a bit. And you think about a guy like this, he's a little bit of a developmental prospect, but also projects as a multi-year starter. When you look at, in the SEC and big time football, had offers from Florida, obviously, and then Clemson, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Auburn were in the play for him. So, 6'5", 250 pounds, he's going to need to put on more muscle. But again, this sort of goes back to Napier. You look at, Gavin Hill on the defensive line, Isaiah Nixon on the defensive line, and now you've got TJ Searcy at the defensive line. Those guys are ranked 153rd, 194th, and 259th. And you start thinking about that, and about 20% of guys ranked in that range end up being NFL players. So a couple more guys in that ranking, and you're pretty sure you're going to get at least one NFL quality player out of that. Searcy may be that guy, maybe not, but that is a place where you would expect one or maybe even two of those guys to turn into big time contributors and certainly starters at the Power 5 level. And so you add a guy like Searcy, that's a big deal. And again, you look at where I think you can have some criticism of the class overall, but when you look at where Napier has focused, defensive line and offensive line have clearly been an area of focus.
Yep.
But then you've got Aaron Gates, who's an athlete. You've got Creed Whittemore, who's an athlete. Tyree Patterson is a wide receiver. So that's the other place where Florida, if you really look at this year's roster, athleticism and wide receiver is another place. So offensive line, defensive line, wide receiver, and athlete are the places that they've sort of filled needs. And so at this point now, it's a race for the top talent. And Searcy's one of those guys. But, you've got Eugene Wilson, who's committing later this week. You've got DeQuavius Sori, who I think might be committing this week as well. You've got Trayon Webb, who's committing later this week. So Florida can reel in all three of those guys. Now you're talking about 4 top 200 guys or 5 top 200 guys if all three of those guys commit. And you're talking about, 8 of 14 guys then are top 300 recruits. All of a sudden, this recruiting class is looking pretty good.
Yeah.
If you can put a couple of 5-stars in there, 3-4 weeks ago, we're sitting there going, we need to see some commits. We need to see some commits. We need to see some commits. And the comment I made was Napier has to hit on everybody really to get to where we want him to go long-term. And pretty much he's hit on just about everybody except for Myoga this weekend, who decided to go to Miami. But ever since that Jaden Rashada commitment to Miami, just about everybody who we thought was a Florida lean who has committed to Florida. So you follow this up with Carmani McLean, and then, like I said, Eugene Wilson, potentially Sorey, and then Trayon Webb. All of a sudden now we're looking at a class that's, in the 0.91, 0.92 range, which is, right around where Ohio State is on a year-to-year basis. And that's a significant step up from Dan Mullen. So, 3 weeks ago, I would have told you, we're going to see coming up what Napier can do. I think Searcy, along with Sharif Denson and Gavin Hill and Isaiah Nixon, have sort of eased things a little bit and eased some of the tension. Now it's just a question of which one of these guys is going to be able to deliver. But again, I think Searcy being on that defensive line is a good sign, considering that Florida has essentially at this point filled out their areas of need. And now it's get the best players who are on the board.
Yeah, Searcy's a great get on the trail here. A Georgia guy, you listed off all the schools that are after him too. So definitely went up, definitely won a couple of recruiting battles there. So, hey, look, the biggest thing we did talk about a few weeks ago was we're in the hunt for a lot of these guys, but let's get the actual commitment out there so we can start seeing the building blocks come together. And we still want to see some of those high end guys come in. You mentioned Maugoa committing to Miami over on July 4th. We still need to get a few of those guys in the tank here. We might not live up to Will Miles' dreams and aspirations of a top 3 class in 2023 here. However, the building blocks are starting to come together. I really like the foundation of this class. You talked about specifically along the lines. Well, this defensive line class looks pretty stout overall. I'm very fired up to see these guys get in the Gator uniform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing you need to keep in mind is while Searcy is 153rd ranked overall with the composite, he's 188th in the 24/7 sports, but he's 49th in the On3 sports rankings. And so one of the things that you start to see as you go further and further down the rankings rabbit hole with the different ranking services is they all have different things they look for. And oftentimes what you'll see is guys with large disparities between their rankings. So a guy like this, who's ranked 49th in one ranking and 188th in the other, has a lot of boom and bust potential, but that boom could be a guy who ends up being a real difference maker. And so there, the evaluation of the coaches really does make a huge difference, right? When you're talking about the guys who are pretty much consensus 5 stars, I mean, you might have a guy who's ranked like 25th and 4th or something like that, but everybody pretty much agrees that that guy has an NFL future. Once you get back to this place, now there's a large variance. And if you see every service having somebody pegged at like 150th, I think you look at that and go, okay, probably a year's worth of starter and a special teams contributor is the expectation. If you have a service that's ranking somebody 30 and somebody 230 between the two services, then it really is more of a, high upside, but maybe low floor. And that's sort of, I think, what you're seeing here. So Searcy is going to need to put on some weight. He's going to need to develop. He's absolutely, going to need to be, maybe even be a situational pass rusher to start with. But the projection is that he has the ability to grow into a role where he's going to be a significant contributor. And I think, quite honestly, you need those guys in these sorts of classes where I'm not going to say you're going to take a flyer with a guy who's ranked 150th, but where you say, hey, there's a high upside potential to Searcy, and we're going to ride that because our evaluation says he's going to be able to reach his potential.
Yeah, I feel like I see Mike Peterson's name getting called out a lot by recruits as someone that they enjoy developing a relationship with during the recruiting process.
I mean, wouldn't you? A guy played a decade in the NFL,
yeah,
and was a star when he was at Florida. I know guys who are recruits don't remember that, but it's just like we had somebody who played AAA baseball come out to my son's baseball team the other day and help out with the catchers, and everybody's like, "Oh, he played in the minor leagues." Like, that's great. It turns out that when you have someone who's gone before you where you want to go, you pay attention to that person. And so, it's great to talk to Billy Napier in a room and Patrick Toney in a room and, all the guys who are in those rooms. But at the end of the day, Mike Peterson has played middle linebacker in the NFL. And so when he comes in and says, hey, you have the potential to be a middle linebacker in the NFL, I'm going to listen to that. Right. So I think there's a place for guys who didn't play in the pros, but there's absolutely a place for guys who did. And Peterson, I think, fills that role. And then we've just heard a lot about his charisma and the way he makes these guys feel and all that sort of stuff. And that's obviously important. And so making guys feel like they're a part of the team, making them feel like they're a part of what you're building, I think is a big part of recruiting. And Peterson seems to be able to do that.
All you need to know about Mike Peterson's playing career is not even the Jags could screw up signing him in free agency. So that says a lot about him as a football player. All right, let's move on to 4 bits here. Little bit of shocking news. I was shocked when I saw this the other day, so I'm not gonna. I've taken it all in. I've read everything at this point, so I could downplay and pretend like I wasn't shocked when I saw this. But it absolutely shocked me here. USC and UCLA to the Big Ten by 2024. This is a sea change, an administrator in the Big 12 told Sports Illustrated. This is 2 founding members of the league that's won the most national championships in the nation. Pac-12 TV deal expires next season. So this was a move they were looking to make. I saw some other rumblings here. UCLA, they're struggling financially right now. It's not a great look for the school that they're out there putting this out there, but they're out there saying that their Olympic sports were threatened to be cut basically due to financial problems. That's according to the Los Angeles Times. And geographically, I mean, the move makes absolutely no sense geographically, but on paper, we're not living in it ain't 1935 anymore. You don't need to take a train everywhere. And for football's sake, I think there's going to be a different solution. I think we're headed to a world where football is going to be its own entity. And I think the other sports are going to figure out a different solution here. But for football's sake, this really transforms where we're headed as a sport. I feel like there's going to be another free-for-all with realignment coming up here. You're already hearing the rumblings of what's going to happen with the rest of the Pac-12 schools, Oregon and Washington in particular. I have to think that there are plans for the Big Ten to absorb more West Coast teams, because I don't think USC and UCLA are going to sit there out on an island by themselves forever. I have to say, I'm going back for, if you're a baseball nerd, when the Brooklyn Dodgers and San Francisco Giants, when they were started, the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants, they both moved out to San Francisco and Los Angeles the same year, I believe, right? And there was no other teams like west of, was it St. Louis at the time, Will? Back in the day, I'm throwing you on the spot with your baseball history here, but that's what it kind of gives me those vibes. Those Brooklyn Dodgers, New York Giants going out to the West Coast and really establishing a presence there, and kind of baseball filled in the map as they went. I think that's going to happen here with the Big Ten. I think none of these news items mean much to me right now. The Pac-12 and the ACC are looking to cut a deal. I think we're going to figure out this thing slowly but surely, and we're headed to the 2 super conference models that you've quite frankly talked about, and I've laughed at you a few times. I know you probably want me to apologize for laughing at you, but you specifically said Rutgers in the SEC, so I could still technically make fun of you on that one in particular, but they are in the Big Ten, so you get half credit, I suppose.
Well, I mean, so first off, I think we got to say thank you for bringing up the Brooklyn Dodgers, part of our target demographic. They certainly remember that, because I don't remember anything about the Brooklyn Dodgers.
You're not a baseball history nerd? I mean, your boys into some baseball. I didn't know if you guys were some baseball history nerds.
I pay attention to that, but like the New York Giants moved to San Francisco when Willie Mays played. So, we're not talking about recent history.
I'll update my references. I'm sorry.
But so interestingly, I thought the USC UCLA thing happened, and I sort of sat there and said, like that's interesting. And I was in the middle of writing an article, so my real thought was, crap, now I have to go rewrite some parts of that article. But beyond that, I started thinking about it, and I go, you know what? This move strengthens the SEC. And that may be counterintuitive, but what it really does is the only way any of these conferences were going to be able to take out the SEC in any capacity at all was that they were going to have to gang up. They were going to it was going to have to be teams that were big time teams that were going to gang up and come together and basically force the SEC to the table. And at this point, that's gone. I mean, there is no way. And that was basically gone when Oklahoma and Texas went to the SEC. Because, I mean, think about it. You got Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Auburn, Texas, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. You don't have any college football if those teams decide to walk. The Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, and UCLA. There's some history there, but I think you could make it work without them. So, you can go get Oregon or you can go get Washington. I actually think Washington's a more attractive entity since you're in the Seattle area. I think Stanford is a really attractive Big Ten school, both because they like thumbing their nose at having better academic standards, but also because you're sitting there in that San Francisco, Palo Alto area and that market as well. But you're right. This is going to turn into, let's go get the markets that we want. So, the Big Ten is going to protect Chicago. So Northwestern's in the Big Ten. That's it. That's your Chicago market, right? Is there an entity is Lincoln, Nebraska something that anybody gives a crap about? I don't know. And so it's interesting. What's that?
Cornhuskers fans. Very much.
I mean, sure. But this is why Rutgers always made sense to me. It's the New York, New Jersey market. It's an enormous place. Penn State makes a huge difference because a lot of people end up in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Maryland is going to take the DC, which means Virginia Tech, or whoever from that area is going to be an SEC target probably. North Carolina is sort of a Charlotte hub. Clemson and South Carolina are sort of that, Charlotte, Greenville, they're all in sort of that triangle.
Atlanta.
So Atlanta in some respects as well. So those are the things you need to look for, is where are the huge teams, like Memphis, might even be or you got Vanderbilt obviously there in the Nashville area, but is there a place in Tennessee that you want to take advantage of? St. Louis, again, Missouri kind of fits that. That was the idea. I'm not sure that they do a real good job.
Yeah, think about why Missouri was added though, Will, to the SEC. Because geographically, even though they're the furthest north and west, they still kind of fit. This is me talking about Mizzou, the guy who refuses to acknowledge their existence in the SEC, but they kind of fit the picture, right? You're just expanding the puzzle up a little bit north and west. Mizzou was probably picked because it did also make geographic sense to an extent. This is a move completely that we haven't seen before. Almost. I think since the TV deals started, the Supreme Court rulings in the mid 80s opened up the TV, and then college football took off in the 90s with the TV deals and everything, and where the money started to explode. Right. I think that this has we've slowly been watching. If you're going to look back on this 20 to 30 years from now, you go 20, 30 years in the future and look back on this time, this is going to be the era, the demarcation point in history where college football went officially. We've been slowly going toward a nationalized sport. It's been more and more national. It's de-regionalized. Coming up for me, when I was a kid, I lived in Ohio and we watched Ohio State, and the dream of every person who's a Buckeye in that state was to go to the Rose Bowl and watch a beautiful game on January 1st, right? You play USC or someone from the West Coast. That was the dream, and that was the model. When we lost that tradition, when we switched to the BCS, and then you lose the tradition even further when you go to the playoff model, is college football better or worse than it was at that point? And I think the games have gotten better. I think the product's gotten better. And as much as the traditionalists, and so I grew up thinking very much that I was a traditionalist in football here, I'm finding more and more that I'm not, because you look at the schedules week to week to week, right? Florida, for example, let's talk about their schedule this year. We have 3 games in a row. We got LSU at home, Georgia and Jax on the road at A&M. When does Oklahoma play 3 teams like that in a row in the Big 12? USC ain't doing that in the Pac-12 this year. I think the product, so for those of you who aren't super thrilled about this stuff, keep in mind, the product's going to get better and better and better in terms of matchups week to week. I think it's going to get way more competitive. It's going to become way more compelling. And even though this move is really weird and it doesn't seem to make sense, and bye-bye traditional Rose Bowl, I think it's a positive for the sport, and I like the direction we're going overall.
I mean, so I think it's going to be a little bit of both, right? I think teams like, I guess Nebraska's in the Big Ten, but teams like Colorado, teams like Utah, teams like Central Florida, right? Those teams are going to get left out. And when they get left out, they're going to be in a bottom tier, and you're not going to be able to claim a national championship when you go 12-0 against a cake schedule and then beat an uninterested SEC team in a crappy bowl game, right? Are we
going to miss that?
No,
is that part of the greatness of? I mean, it's fun. It's fun to talk about, but it's goofy.
Look. I mean, so Virginia Tech built that program from something where it was a complete also ran and no one paid any attention to it, to a team that played in national championship games, made its way into the Big East, then made its way into the ACC, and is now poised to, depending upon what happens with the grant of rights in the ACC, be one of those teams that gets sniped up by either the SEC or the Big Ten. Florida State was very much the same way. And those are the guys who are really probably going to get left out. Like, I mean, Florida State and Miami aren't really adding. I mean, maybe Miami, you could argue it, but Tallahassee is not a big TV market. And that's not a place where, if you already have Florida, do you really need Florida State if you're trying to expand what your TV deal is? Because that's what this is really going to be. I mean, they're going to pick up teams that are going to help them expand their television deal. And the history may help, but we'll see. So what it's going to do is it's going to, it's not like when we have the USFL that's kicking off this off season, right? That if you wanted to turn on like FX1, you could see, or FS1, you could see a USFL game, or it's in USA or something like that. None of the Toronto or the Canadian Football League, right? The Toronto Argonauts are not going to join the NFL. Right. The NFL has bypassed those entities to a point where there is no danger that the New York Jets are going away, though maybe they should, or that the Jacksonville Jaguars are going away, though I think you can certainly make an argument that you could relegate them. But none of those teams are going away because they have established themselves. This league has established itself as superior to all the other leagues out there, a superior product. And that product is going to perpetuate until brain injuries bring it down. The college football is going to basically be the same way. Now, in some ways, that's really exciting because Florida is going to have an entity that plays Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Texas A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, and then, hey, a couple of cross-conference rivalry games against Ohio State, Penn State, and USC. That's a really cool schedule for somebody who's a Florida fan. Right. Yes. The question then becomes what gets left out. Now, here's the great part is this really does cement the SEC in a position of power. Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned that the USC and UCLA is sort of the demarcation line where we'll look at it. I actually don't think that's quite right. I think the demarcation line, and one of the reasons why the Big Ten went for the teams out West is because there's going to be a giant legal battle when it comes to pry and loose those ACC teams. And I think they're kind of sitting there going, hey, SEC, how about you snipe a few of those guys in the ACC? You do all the legal work and figure that stuff out. And then we'll come in and get the also rans. So, the SEC is poised to take whoever they want from that southeastern area. So North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Clemson make a huge amount of sense. And then you figure out one more team you want to take. But the rest of the Big Ten was the SEC was going to say, hey, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, you want to join us? And all of a sudden you've got one big super conference that decides to split into regions and stake some people up. So the Big Ten has a seat at the table now. They're going to be able to negotiate some TV rights based on this. You're right that the winds are changing. I don't know that's going to change as quickly as people think it will, just because NIL has changed things a little bit in terms of the incentive structures for the players. But eventually, if it turns into a real, essentially professional league, they're going to need things like workers' comp and all that sort of stuff that comes along with the injuries and the payments.
Figure it out as we go. No NIL this episode, Will. We said no NIL.
Well, but it turns out when you make like $30 billion in your TV deal, you can afford to pay the players at that point. That's what's coming.
Woody Hayes and Bo Schembechler were making like $50,000, like $30,000 to $50,000 throughout their careers per year. It was a different era when you didn't pay the college guys. So it's like all this change that everybody's talked about with college sports is just all coming at once. It's great. This is absolute chaos. And I think it's fascinating to keep up with. I do believe SEC wise though. I don't love it. I mean, I know the Virginia schools, you got good academics there in Charlottesville and everything. And I know Virginia Tech, they got a solid football. They feel more Big Ten-y to me, Will. But the thing is, too, is like with the ACC, I obviously think your obvious targets are Clemson, Miami, Florida State. And I don't think it's all about TV markets anymore. You look at where we're headed. Like, what do you subscribe? I have YouTube TV. Like, I don't have one particular – like I could watch any college football game. I could watch Purdue and Michigan State play. Like back in the day, that mattered when it was a little more regional. But that's why my point earlier, the sport's becoming completely deregionalized to where you're opening up these huge avenues, like where it doesn't matter. Like think about if you didn't know anything about college football, and I explained the setup of college football to you that's existed for the last 30 years. And I said, okay, well, this part of the country, this is Big Ten country, and this is the Pac-12, and this is, well, let me tell you about Big Ten country here, and this is the SEC. Like I kind of went through the map, and there's this huge school called Notre Dame. They're independent because they want to be, and they can do it. They can justify it financially. Well, why don't they join a conference? They don't want to. Like it's been a really goofy setup like this whole time, and we're going to a point where we're breaking down all these things that basically served as barriers for why schools can't compete with each other at times. Like, why should Florida never play Oklahoma State in a regular season game? Not Oklahoma State. Like, why does that barely ever happen? Why do we stick so tightly to our regions in college football? Back in the day, it had a purpose. It was tough to travel that far all the time, but it's cool. Like even with Scott Strickland here, the philosophy he's embraced with the non-conference scheduling. I mean, I desperately want to go to that Utah game next year and check out the stadium situation there in Salt Lake City. I think that's a cool road trip.
Last time you'll get a chance before they get frozen out of the two-team or the two-conference system.
Right. And that's what, like, I think this whole bringing the sport to a more national level, I would love to see Florida out there playing in Big Ten country a little more in different spots. I think there are a lot of positives. You might lose that feel that you had with it, during the Spur years, during the 90s, 2000s, you might lose the feel of the sport to some extent. But I think a lot of the changes that are coming, it's just like the playoff, college football playoff. How many fans, what percentage of fans would want to go back to the regular bowl system and not have the playoff? People cried about having a playoff my entire life growing up, and we finally got it. It's awesome. I like it. I think it's been positive for the sport. Now, do weird things happen? Like, do you lose your conference championship game and become the SEC runner-up and then turn around and beat the same team a few weeks later and get crowned national champions? Big asterisk on that one in my mind, Will. But that things like that happen now. They didn't happen before, but they didn't happen before because you had weird situations like, the Big Ten and the Pac-10 are locked into a Rose Bowl contract. So the number one team has to play, Michigan has to play Washington State instead of playing Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. And I'm glad we've moved past some of those problems as a sport. And I think we're knocking down other barriers here with all these changes is the long-winded answer to get to that point.
Look, all I know is that if you're going to join the SEC, you should have to have a grass field. That should be the requirement. That's why Missouri's not a real SEC team.
Bye, Vanderbilt.
They've got turf over there. And I mean, Vanderbilt, we let them in because we need to beat the crap out of them every once in a while. Kentucky used to have a grass field and they switched it over. But, I think to join, you should have a grass field. Texas, so Notre Dame used to, they don't anymore. If they want to join, they need to change it over to grass. And then Clemson and Virginia Tech and Virginia and North Carolina and even Florida State and Miami. Though Miami doesn't have an actual field, they just borrow off the Dolphins. So, I'm not sure that we can let them in either. But that's my only requirement is grass fields, man. That makes it feel like the SEC when you got a grass field.
Grass fields, that's a big stipulation there. Well, that's I'm sure some people could. I think a lot of people are going to be applying for the SEC now that you put that out there. Arizona State, welcome, bring them in. Yeah, so overall this I said it at the front end, major sea change for the sport. Excited to see what's next. Will, which team, if you had to bring in two or three teams as the next move for the SEC, who do you want to see?
Virginia Tech, North Carolina, and Colorado.
Colorado?
Denver is a huge market, man. And I know you said that you don't want the TV markets are sort of blasé or whatever, but I don't think so. I think the more eyeballs you have and the more geographic reach you have, the better off your product's going to be long-term. And so, I know everybody's looking and saying, what's the natural fit in the Southeast for the conference? But it makes me wonder whether teams like Virginia Tech, Virginia, North Carolina, Clemson, and those teams, you could think of it as almost like a Big Ten East and a Big Ten West, and then an SEC East and an SEC West. And the SEC West would be Texas, Oklahoma State, Colorado, and
Almost
other
the old
places.
Big 12.
Yeah, well, other places as you,
Big 12.
well, maybe so. I mean, look, there's a limited number of Power Five teams out there, right? I mean, you had the 4 conferences, each of them had, used to have 12 teams in them. So you're not talking about this. If you're essentially going from 48 to 40, right? You're only squeezing out 8. So Kansas, get them out of there. Right. I mean, and then you look at, Oregon State. No, not really. Do you need Stanford and Cal Berkeley? Nah, kick one of those guys
But
out.
that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to just pick and choose like that. I don't believe. Because I think you look at, there's a story back in the day when the Big 12 was being formed, when they're increasing from the Big 8 to the Big 12. Baylor was going through a rough stretch in football, and they were pretty terrible at the time. And that's why I always remember growing up, Baylor's not a great school for football. And they've recently gotten it together here in the last 10, 15 years. But there was political pressure within Texas, like in high level Texas politics, that to make sure that, okay, if y'all want like all these other Southwest schools to be, it was like Texas, A&M, I think it was the SWAC schools that were getting added to the Big 8 to become the Big 12. Texas A&M, you have to include Baylor in the mix. Like Baylor was forced upon the issue, and that's why like other schools weren't included in that mix. They took on Baylor to get Texas A&M. So you might see some of that in some of those states where I would think Oregon State would want to be paired with Oregon wherever they go, and Washington State wouldn't want to be left off in the cold. I don't think that's going. I think there'll be some package deals out there. Plenty of package deals.
It used to be that the money that you got from the legislature, and quite honestly, probably more importantly, the fact that they didn't push the antitrust exemptions, meant that you could be cajoled by politicians. I don't know if that's going to happen anymore. I mean, ESPN's doling out billions of dollars to the SEC, and it's only going to get bigger with this expansion. As things expand, as things get bigger, each of these schools are going to see dollar amounts that are way more than they could ever get from the individual legislators. And so, you're going to end up in the same situation potentially where, like the Tampa Bay Rays right now are sitting there in an awful stadium in St. Petersburg. Nobody wants to go across that bridge at rush hour to get to that place. It's not a fun place to watch a game. And they keep talking about, all right, well, what are we, we need to find a place over in Tampa. Now, Tampa thus far has been resistant to building a new stadium, but that's what's coming. What's coming is that the entities that end up in these super conferences are going to have more leverage than the legislature has. In the past, the legislatures had more leverage than the institutions have had. In many ways, because the institutions were tied to the football program, but the institutions weren't only football programs. And so, I suspect that at some point it'll be the football team associated with the University of Florida, not the University of Florida football team for all of these entities, right? That they're going to break off separately.
Yeah.
And that they're not going to have education as part of their goal. Now you can say that's good or that's bad, but it is, right? I mean, that's sort of where we're headed. And we've been headed there for a while. I mean, Nick Saban's been making $9.5 million a year now for a few years. He was the high, they're talking about the highest paid public employee in the state, is the head coach at Alabama. It's not even close. So it's not as though our priorities haven't been out of whack for a while. It's just now things are starting to move in a way that's going to advantage everyone in the system rather than just the few who are sitting there at the top.
At Florida, the UAA, the University Athletic Association, is a separate entity from the school.
Yep.
And they have an agreement of they give back X amount to the school per year. But so it's already like that to some extent, just might be further and further. And I honestly think there's going to be a model where football operates differently than Olympic sports, operates differently than basketball. I think it's because we're headed to new pastures here, man. But I don't understand a lot of the hate toward it in a way, because there are people, and believe me, I love college football tradition. I love the history of the sport. I'm very into sports history in general. I just talked about the Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants. Well, I love the history. I respect it too, but we're correcting a lot of the things that there were always a little like holes in the sport that I think are starting to be filled in. And I think it's interesting. We'll see it develop. I would say if you're upset by a lot of the changes, just be patient, give it some time. It'll settle in. I think I think the product's getting better and better. The product's better today than it was 20 years ago. And I think 20 years from now, I think it'll still be great. I think we're going in a good direction overall.
Well, to harken back to our target market from Wayne's World, Garth, we fear change. Like that sort of sums it up, right? I mean, people, people instinctively buck back at change. Doesn't mean it's not good change or bad change, just change, right? People buck back and go, it's not what it was. And that's absolutely true. It's not what it was. But I think if you look back at the sport 10 years ago, it's not what it was now, what it was 10 years ago. And 10 years before that, there had been change too. It's been gradual change. And now we're seeing a pretty monumental shift. But that monumental shift has been 20, 30, 40 years in the making. It used to be you could only get the local games on TV. And then the TV opened up, and all of a sudden now college football proliferated everywhere. And I don't want to go back to a Saturday where I can only watch my team on TV, or where I have to travel to go watch the game because it's blacked out in my particular area. I can watch every SEC game that's on in an entire weekend, except for some of them overlap. So I have to DVR two others and like watch them later. Right. And that is an awesome Saturday and an awesome way to spend time, and a good way to spend time with my family and my son specifically, and those sorts of things. So it's change, but in my mind, it's been good change because I have enjoyed some of those things. Does that mean there's some bad stuff that's come along with it? Absolutely.
Yep.
And that's the thing, right? Is no change is perfect. And so we can sit there and pick at all of the different things that we think are going to be bad, or we can say, look, the change in the past has been net positive. And so I'm hoping the change in the present will be net positive. And I think you and I have sort of highlighted some of the things that are coming from this that are going to be positive overall. And again, Florida's in good position. So if you're a Florida fan, the good news is you're not going to be left out in the cold. If I was Florida State or Miami, I'd be a little bit nervous. And if I was Central, I'd be sitting there going, oh, crap. Like,
yeah, they're the ones that they finally got into a Power 5 conference, and they're
all those
going,
machinations to get into a Power 5 conference. And immediately Florida was like, hey, let's vote along to strafe the Big 12 and pull the two big dogs out of there. So
I think Clemson, 3 schools I'd like to see: Clemson, Florida State, Miami coming in the SEC would be a lot of fun. But also, part of me doesn't want to lose that advantage over them to being in the SEC. But if we're going to a 2 conference model, might happen anyway at some point. All right, Will, let's go on here to 6 bits. We're going to talk about the overall odds to win the SEC here. We pulled these odds from DraftKings. We're going to start at the top. We'll work our way down. Or you know what? Let's start at the bottom. Let's do it opposite, Will. We'll have fun with this one here. Coming in at a clear 14th, the Vanderbilt Commodores plus 100,000. Will, you going to go put $1 on Vandy to win the SEC?
No,
you're good on that.
Yeah.
Missouri plus 30,000, South Carolina, Auburn both at plus 15,000, and Mississippi State at plus 10,000. I like Mississippi State pulling an upset or two this year. I'm not wagering any money on them winning the whole conference though.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that there's a pecking order at the top, and probably a fool's errand to pick anybody but 2 programs.
No faith in South Carolina there for Spencer Rattler, I guess. Plus 7,000 LSU, plus 6,000 Arkansas, plus 5,500 there Kentucky, and plus 5,000 Tennessee and Ole Miss. So, hey, Will, I thought Florida was the 4th best team in the SEC East here. I'm seeing Kentucky, LSU fall off here, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Arkansas, a lot of teams with positive preseason buzz here being called out. Haven't heard the Gators just yet.
Well, so it turns out that, like, none of these guys who do the preview magazines, including us, actually have to put money on the predictions. And it turns out that when people start putting money on the predictions, all of a sudden, sort of the pecking order of what people think about the talent and what people think about those programs in general starts to come out. I haven't seen, you sent me this list, but I didn't get a chance to look at it. I'm assuming that it's going to play out very much similarly to the way the recruiting rankings do every single year in terms of who people think is going to win.
Well, our Florida Gators are next and 4th in line here at plus 4,500. Texas A&M plus big jump here, plus 1,800 for the Aggies to win, plus 145 for the Bulldogs, and minus 135 for the favorite, the Alabama Crimson Tide. As expected here, Alabama's got a lot coming back with Bryce Young and company. Will Anderson, both sides of the ball, absolutely loaded here for Bama coming back. And I mean, A&M, I have no faith in them jumping up to win the SEC. You expect them to take the next step, certainly this year with improved quarterback play. But I think that's about right. I really don't have any qualms with this list. I'm pretty good with it overall.
I don't have any qualms with the list. The only thing I would say is where's the value bet, right? I mean,
the value bet to win the conference.
Well, I think everybody in the West is not a value bet. Right, because you've got A&M and you've got Alabama. Unless you're putting money on those two, and putting money on Alabama, you actually got to pay for the privilege of doing that, right? I mean, they're what, minus 130, something like that. Yeah. So if you think A&M might be able to pick them off, then maybe you make some money there. But again, I look at Florida and I look at where's the upside, right? The upside for the two programs that have an opportunity are Florida, if Anthony Richardson is transcendent, and Tennessee, if their defense can even like grow pulse. And those are the two that I would look at and say, all right, like Kentucky is not winning the SEC. Even if they beat Georgia, even if they come out of the East, it's going to be like one of those years where Missouri came out of the East and then just got pummeled by whoever came out of the West. I think the same thing probably applies to Florida, but I've watched Florida with a really good quarterback be able to hang with the Tide, right? And, just 2 years ago. And so quarterbacks cover a multitude of sins. I think that's one of the reasons why Tennessee is also dangerous, because Hendon Hooker has been very good, not just last year at Tennessee, but he was very good at Virginia Tech before he transferred. And so those are the two that if you were looking at it saying, hey, I have $5 to bet, I'm willing to lose it, but I want to put it in a place where if it hits, I'm going to make a boatload of money. Well, that's the Florida bet with Anthony Richardson and the Tennessee bet with Hooker.
Yeah, I can't argue with either one of those. I like Ole Miss as a little wild card, but again, I like Ole Miss as a wild card to maybe they'll beat Texas A&M, maybe they'll beat Alabama. I don't think Ole Miss is running the table or doing anything like that. I almost think it would be more interesting because it's kind of where the league stands right now. Like in Alabama versus the field bet or Georgia versus the field, take that. That'd be almost a more interesting way to put it, because outside of those two, you see it in the odds. It jumps from plus 145 with Georgia all the way up to plus 1,800 with A&M, and then another huge gap to plus 4,500 with the Gators there. It really just shows you it's kind of a 3-team race this year in most people's mind, but mostly Alabama, Georgia once again.
Now, the only thing I would say is if you think Florida's going to win, you're actually probably better off from a monetary perspective. Just betting Florida, the money line the whole way through. Like basically you're going to get better than 4,000 or 4,500 to 1 odds if you pick them to run the table against Georgia, A&M, and LSU. And so you probably make more money if you put, let's say you put $5 on each of those 3 games rather than $15 at plus 4,500. That would be the only thing I'd say. And that sort of goes back to what you said, right? Is at any point along the way, one of these entities might be able to step up and snipe somebody. You just don't necessarily expect them to win the conference. But if you really have confidence that one of them is going to win the conference, the futures bets usually don't factor in the odds for the individual games throughout the season. You usually do better betting that way.
I'm going to throw one out. And before you scoff here, you said look for a value bet. And this is an absolute long shot according to the odds too. But do me a favor and pull up LSU's schedule right now. I'm hand to God, pull up the schedule here and look at the first half of the schedule and tell me where there's a definitive loss on that schedule. We'll go through game by game with LSU, but you said you wanted to look for maybe a little bit of a value bet. Let's see what the Tigers, because I know they open up September 4th at Florida State, and of course this is SEC, so really only their SEC schedule.
Well, it's versus Florida State in the Superdome, so that's a home game for LSU.
Yeah.
Then you now that they've dispatched with the cupcake, then they get to play the Southern Jaguars,
right? Probably 2-0
in week 2. Then Mississippi State
at home or on the road.
That's at home.
Okay.
Then New Mexico
Winnable.
At home.
Yep.
Then at Auburn.
Winnable.
Tennessee.
Winnable. Home.
At Florida.
Baton Rouge. Tennessee, Baton Rouge.
Tennessee's in Baton Rouge.
Yep.
Then at Florida.
Tough.
Old Miss in Baton Rouge.
Tell me the definitive loss there. That you just made it through almost the first 2 months of the season. Where's the definitive loss?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like every SEC West schedule. They scheduled Florida State back when somebody thought Florida State might be good. Their two cross rivals are Tennessee and Florida, which, are good East teams, right?
Right.
And then Alabama and A&M are on the schedule. And then Arkansas is in there too. But
their November is brutal. They got a brutal November. So they'll get exposed in November most likely. But if you're looking for a value bet as like kind of a long shot, I think there's a good shot that LSU comes into the Swamp undefeated. And any Gator fan, I think, was looking at that game as a toss-up this year, as it is usually. It's never a definitive one way or another. But, I mean, if you told me LSU came into the Swamp and picked us off this year, it wouldn't shock me. But I hope we beat them. But I like to take care of business at home against LSU, but it's not unthinkable that they could come into the Swamp and beat us.
No, I think it comes back, though, to they have to beat Alabama during the regular season, and then they're going to have to beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. Right. And when you think about, value bets for winning the conference, I mean, that's really where things start to constrict, because, again, I think there's an opportunity. Heck, Florida won the East 2 years ago, right? And everybody picked Georgia to start. But Florida didn't win the SEC East, or didn't win the SEC 2 years ago. And that's sort of the rub, right? So we know that some of these things are coming. There's going to be some, there's going to be some sort of machinations as the season goes on. But who's actually going to win the conference? I think most of us kind of anticipate that it's going to be either Georgia or Alabama or Texas A&M. And if it's not one of those, then you would have been better off betting whoever it is throughout the season.
So give me one outside of those three that you can call your dark horse, or we called it a value bet here. LSU is mine. Give me yours.
Like I said, Florida and Tennessee.
Florida and Tennessee.
Those are the two. I think Georgia is. So I think Alabama was a year early last year. I think when you look at their all SEC guys, they were sophomores. I think they were a year early. And I think Bryce Young carried them in some respects. And I think they got lucky in some respects too. That Auburn game specifically is one where I look at and go, yeesh. And even the A&M loss was one where you look at and go, this isn't really an elite team. The game against Florida, right? I mean, that was one where they had it in the bag and then just sort of let Florida creep back into it. And quite honestly, got driven off the ball. That isn't going to happen this year. They lost in the national championship game, and they're going to be ticked off. And now the guys who are ticked off look at it. You got, was it Anderson, who's the defensive end? Jr., Will Anderson, the defensive end, is coming back, not because he's not ready for the NFL. He's coming back because he has to, because the NFL won't let him come.
He might have been the number one pick in the NFL.
Oh, he absolutely would have been the number one pick in the NFL draft. And now he's coming back, and he's got all of his buddies who are now juniors as well. So that's the first thing, is I think Alabama is head and shoulders better than anybody else in the conference this year. A returning Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, and the timing for them is much, much better. Then you take the converse look and you go, okay, well, now let's look at Georgia. Well, Georgia had almost their entire defense drafted. So no more Nakobe Dean, no more Jared Davis, no more, none of these guys who were out there just causing havoc last year. And that doesn't mean they won't have very good players on there, but that was a transcendent defense last year. Mm-hmm. And, Stetson Bennett's still a quarterback. I actually have an article I'm working on right now about him. And he played very, very well last year, but let's see what happens when he gets behind, because we saw what happened when he got behind last year against Alabama. He could not do it. They kept it close enough and were able to force the Tide into a bunch of field goals in the championship game. And that gave Stetson Bennett an opportunity to make a couple of plays and allow Georgia to win that game. But if you play against a team that's going up and down the field, I think Georgia's going to struggle. So I look at the conferences and I say the East is an easier road, even if you think of Georgia as a behemoth. And, the West is a harder road, even if Alabama was just as good as they were last year. But Alabama, I think, is better. And so I think Jimbo's going to experience the wrath of Lord Saban at some point this year. It would not be surprising to me if they went undefeated and went all the way to the SEC championship game undefeated, which means if you're going to have a dark horse, it isn't going to be LSU. It's going to be somebody from the East who manages to get in there. Somebody gets hurt in the last week or two of the season. Either Will Anderson or Bryce Young get hurt, and all of a sudden now the tables sort of shift in terms of who has an advantage, or, Patrick Toney turns around the defense, or Josh Heupel figures out a way to get that defense at Tennessee turned around, and they're able to win a shootout against a very, very good team as well. So those would be my dark horses. I don't think it's going to happen, but those would be my dark horses, in particular because Hooker and Richardson have an ability to potentially be not transcendent, but have a potential to be Heisman level quarterbacks. And that's the only way you overcome a talent gap is you got a Heisman level candidate. And quite honestly, Florida almost did that a couple of years ago with Kyle Trask, right? I mean, Trask and Pitts and Tony just went up and down the field against Alabama, a very, very good Alabama team. In fact, one of the best Alabama teams Saban's had. Were able to go with them score for score. The problem is the defense was not even close to adequate. And, that's sort of what Tennessee had last year. So they're going to have to fix that. And Florida's offense sputtered a little bit last year. They'll have to fix that. And, the odds that either one of them is able to do that is relatively minimal. But I think Georgia, who they lost and who they have coming back, sets it up to where you say, if you told me to pick who's going in the East, I'd tell you Georgia. But I think there's an opportunity for those second and third teams to win. I don't think anybody's winning in the West other than Alabama.
Good analysis there. Let's move on to a dollar here. We'll go over under for every SEC team. So this one's going to take a minute here, but we're going to start with our Florida Gators. Again, these are from DraftKings. Got these today from DraftKings. Over under numbers at 7 wins, -130 for the over and +110 for the under. Will, I think this is one of the easier ones out there. It's not just because I'm wearing the hat. I look at the schedule here, and I think those Utah-Kentucky games, and thank God Utah's at home. Thank God Utah's at home. Utah's going to be tough. That's going to be that's a total coin flip. Utah could absolutely come in and beat us in week 1. That's absolutely doable. There's no excuse to lose to Kentucky at home in year 1 of Billy Napier. Don't do that. Don't lose to Kentucky. If we take care of business, we go at least 1-1 in that stretch. I think we're coming out of September 3-1 at the worst, because I think as much as the hype, hey man, I'm just as excited as everyone else about Tennessee almost beating Purdue in the Music City Bowl. Their offense was a lot of fun to watch in that day. They still have lost 16 of 17 to us. I feel like we go up to Rocky Top, take care of business in that one. And if we kind of follow that path in September, I think we easily hit the 7.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think obviously the schedule is a little bit more difficult this year. At the same time, when's the last time Florida didn't have a coach who quit on them and they didn't win 8 games?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Will Muschamp in his first year taking over for Urban Meyer, but Meyer himself sort of left saying the program was broken. So, in terms of Florida's ability to be able to win that number of games with these coaches, with new coaches, I think, and again, I look at the talent profile of this team. The talent profile is better than Utah. It's better than Kentucky. It's better than Tennessee. It's better than Missouri. It's better than South Carolina. It's better than Florida State. And so, they should be able to put 8 wins on the board. But, obviously things can kind of snowball, right? And if you have an injury to Anthony Richardson, I think that's kind of why this is sitting at 7. I've seen it 6.5 other places. The reason it's sitting there is if you have an injury to Anthony Richardson and Florida is forced to rely on its running game, well, look, I mean, there are definitely some holes on the offensive line. Now, I think the offensive line with Osiris Torrance, and I think the offensive line, particularly with Ethan White, is going to be better than people think. It was really good last year. They were able to run the ball effectively the first half of the season until Ethan White went out with an injury. So I think they'll probably be good up there. And I think that's sort of what drives them to the 8 wins. And I think I agree with you. I would go with the over on this one. I'm not like huge, I'm not sitting there going, oh, they're going to win 10. This is obvious. At 6.5, I would have definitely taken the over, because 7 I think is definitive, but this one I think is pretty easily capable of being a push depending upon how things go.
Yeah, I selected them in the magazine to be 8-4, and I went the conservative route on that one because I think there might be an upset along the way. But the only 2 games you look at the schedule with Florida, the only 2 games in which they're significant underdogs, I feel like, will be Georgia and on the road at A&M, but that's a projection. We'll see how A&M follows up last season. All right, let's move on to Alabama here. The Crimson Tide will over under 10.5 wins. I think I know your answer on this one already. -230 on the over, +185 on the under. This is the only trap I see here. Will, there is an early road trip to Austin, which is probably going to be a little overhyped. I don't think the Longhorns are quite there yet, but Steve Sark, Sarkisian, they're going to be, I think they're going to be ready for the Crimson Tide's best shot. I think you'll get maybe an interesting half of football out of Texas, and then reality will set in. I do expect Alabama to roll in that game. However, not totally upset proof there. And then they got a road trip at the beginning of October to Arkansas that's quite interesting before Jimbo comes rolling in October. So Yeah, there's a couple spots where you could slip up there, but I'm not really worried about a lot of the other pieces of the schedule there, Will.
You got Mississippi State updating or upsetting them too, right?
Not Alabama. No. No, not Alabama. They will not beat Alabama.
All right. Over.
I'm over on that too. We don't need to discuss them a whole lot. Let's go with the next one here is Arkansas. The Razorbacks are over under 7.5 wins, plus 125 on the over, minus 145 on the under. I think this is the first one that's actually truly difficult. If you look at their non-conference schedule here, Cincinnati, they open with Cincinnati. That's not a true pushover right there. You got a playoff team coming in, and then you got a road game at BYU, Will. In the middle of the season, for no reason in particular, you're just going on a road game in the middle of October to BYU. Doesn't make a ton of sense to me here, Will. If you're counting on over 7.5, you're counting on the Razorbacks to really take care of business and not slip up at all. So meaning South Carolina is a win, meaning you take care of business against Mississippi State. I think South Carolina's or Arkansas has improved a lot under Sam Pittman. I'm not ready to put my total faith and say they won't, maybe they should beat Auburn this year. I don't. Am I going to bet on the Razorbacks to go into Jordan-Hare and get it done, though? Not necessarily. So I'm going to take the under. I'm going to take the under on the 7.5 wins and go with the minus 145 odds.
Yeah, I mean, if you look for the last 10 years for Arkansas, 4-8, 3-9, 7-6, 8-5, 7-6 for Brett Bielema. That's kind of where they leveled out. Then 4-8. Then they bring in Chad Morris, goes 2-10, 2-10. Sam Pittman 3-7, and then 9-4 last year. That 9-4 record a little bit aided by the fact that they had Rice to lead off the season, then Georgia Southern, then Arkansas Pine Bluff on the schedule. So they were basically 3-0 before the season even started, which means you're going 6-4 the rest of the way out, which look is not nothing, but it's not incredibly impressive, right? When it came against teams that were elite, Georgia, Ole Miss, Auburn, and Alabama, they lost. They beat Texas A&M, which is one of the reasons why the natives would be really restless there at College Station if Jimbo hadn't brought in that number one recruiting class. But look, I think the history at Arkansas says that you're probably going to start to peg out at 9 wins, best case scenario. And you're not going to be able to do that every year. And there's no shame in that. Just like I don't think there's any shame in Kentucky having a 9-win season and the next year going 6-6 and then going 10-3 the next year and then going 6-6. Like that ping-ponging back and forth and having to build where everything comes together in one year is significant. Now they do have KJ Jefferson coming back, so that's a big deal to have your quarterback coming back. But I didn't think Jefferson was really that great last year. So, 4-4 in the conference last year. I'm not a believer in Arkansas, so I think I take the under on this one.
I think they're going to keep that mentality. They're going to be that scrappy team, but I also think they're going to lose. They're going to lose a couple weird games too. Like I just don't. I'm not total faith there. Auburn over under 6.5 wins. Not a lot of faith in what Brian Harson's doing out there in the Plains right now. Here with 6.5 being the point for Auburn, plus 135 on the over, minus 165 on the under. You start the season off with 2 wins here, most likely. Mercer and San Jose State come to town. What I like about their schedule is their first 5 games are in Jordan-Hare. However, 2 of them are Penn State and LSU. But you got Missouri in there, mixed in there too. They played Penn State. Auburn wasn't great last year. They played Penn State tough. They went up there. They played Penn State pretty tough there in the whiteout environment. It was very cool Saturday night game to watch. I easily think I would have thought I would have taken the under with this team. I'm not too thrilled. I did predict them to be pretty poor, I believe. My prediction in the magazine came with the under 6.5. But there's part of me, Will, I look at this schedule. Would you be shocked if they went 4-0 against Mercer, San Jose State, Penn State, Missouri at home in the month of September? Would you be stunned if that happened?
No,
me neither.
I have him over. I think getting rid of Bo Nix is a net positive. I think Nix was brought in by the previous staff. I don't think
Oregon quarterback that's going to lead them to the playoff.
I didn't say he was going to lead him to the playoff. I said Oregon's going to make the playoff. But so I think getting rid of Bo Nix is a net positive, not just because Bo Nix has struggled in his time there at Auburn, but because he was brought in by the previous staff. And I think a fresh start is probably good for everybody. TJ Finley coming in from LSU, big time arm. Then you got Zach Calzada coming in from A&M, beat Auburn last year. Got Robbie Ashford and Holden Gariner, who are both top 300 recruits at the quarterback position. So I think for the position that you have to have depth and that you have to have talent at, I think that quarterback room is pretty good at Auburn. And I think there is a little bit of circle of the wagons type stuff for Harsin, right? I mean, he went through an awful lot this offseason. Some of the players may not have bought in. You lose a couple of games early on and you can envision things sort of going in the tank. But your point, I think, is well taken, that you can see them easily being 4-0, and then there's no reason for anybody to go into the tank. And part of me just wants to see Auburn go 9-3, get absolutely blasted by Alabama again, and then have the entire fan base there in the plains arguing about whether Harsin can get the job done. So that quite honestly, I'm taking the over just because I'm rooting for him to sort of split the fan base when it comes to should he stay or should he go.
Yeah, Texas A&M and LSU come to the Plains. We got road games at Georgia, at Alabama, at Ole Miss, and then going to Starkville is never fun. So that's a tough chore there. This is a good one. So you took the. I'm gonna stick with the under because I do think that this is a team that's going to struggle a little bit this year. But you got the over on that, so we'll differ on that one. Georgia Bulldogs over under at 10.5 wins. Over is priced out here at -205, and the under is +165. You got Oregon open the season, Will. I don't think many people are expecting that to be an upset. I think most people are expecting the Dogs to handle the Ducks. And if they do handle that game, boy, it's almost cruise control here going down the line. Samford, which we saw, hopefully they don't score 42 points and a half there. Georgia, well, hopefully they do. At South Carolina, Kent State, at Missouri, Auburn, and Vanderbilt. I mean, Georgia's rolling into Jacksonville undefeated here. This is a pretty easy over for me on the 10.5, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fool's gold to look at 12 games and think they're going to lose 2 of them. Maybe they get sniped somewhere along the way. I think Oregon has a real shot at winning that game, though it is in Atlanta. So there's it's a home game, and that does make a difference. But it's also the first game of the year, and weird stuff happens in the first game of the year, and a few broken coverages, and Stetson Bennett having to come back from a big deficit, and maybe things look different. But look, I mean, they're the class of the East, and somebody's gonna have to knock them off, whether that's Florida or Tennessee or Kentucky, or somebody's gonna have to take it from them. They're not just gonna hand it over. So yeah, I think betting there, you'd be pretty hard pressed to take anything but the over.
So you named 3 of the teams, but starting with Florida at the end of October, you got to stretch Florida, Tennessee, at Mississippi State, and at Kentucky. So maybe you get picked off once there. I have a hard time seeing this program getting picked off twice throughout the season, though. So fairly solid with that over 10.5. Kentucky over 7.5, -160, +135 on the under. The Wildcats, Will, coming off another solid season here, but they had a few games go their way last year. They had a couple things go their way, including a win over Florida here. However, this is a similar situation. If they come out and if they somehow beat Florida in Gainesville, they're very likely 4-0 heading into October. But even if they lose to Florida, very good chance they're 3-1. So they're going to probably get 3 wins the first month of the season, and then you're just looking to pick off a few more here down the stretch.
What's their over under?
Over under 7.5.
I'm gonna go under.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that.
Go look at the guys who got drafted in the NFL. Wan'Dale Robinson, Josh Pascal,
get him out of there.
And then so Robinson's a wide receiver. Pascal was the heart and soul of that defense at defensive end, and they did some really unique stuff to make sure that Emory Jones couldn't run last year. Then you got Luke Fortner, the center who was drafted by your Jaguars, and then Darian Kennard, the offensive tackle drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. So you think about what Mark Stoops wants to do there. It's run the ball with Rodriguez and then and then play tough defense. And he lost the heart and soul to his defense. He lost his one receiving threat, and he lost two big time offensive linemen to the NFL. So, I look at that and go, this is a reload year for Kentucky. And everybody's looking at Will Levis and saying, oh, well, he's going to be a top 10 draft pick. I'm sorry. He's not going to be a top 10 draft pick. Like, maybe he's a third round pick, maybe even sneaks into the second round. But I don't see any scenario where he's a first round draft pick. And so if your expectation is he's going to carry them, I think you're going to be disappointed. And I just look at it and say, what is it about the game that they played against Florida last year that makes you think they're going to beat teams like that again? Like, everything had to go right for them to win that game, and it was in Lexington. So you switch that around. It's going to be in Gainesville, a Florida team that isn't like scared of its own shadow. And all of a sudden, those plays start going the other direction. So considering I think I'm pretty high on Tennessee and Florida, I have to be low on teams like Kentucky. I think they're under on 7.5.
You know what's funny with this? If the number were 6.5, would you go over?
No,
I think I'd be over on a 6.5. I can't get to 8 though. I can't get to 8 with this team.
I think they're 6-6.
Yeah. I'm taking the under on 7.5 as well. If it were 6.5, I might go over though, because that'd be close.
And again, that's nothing to be ashamed of. You went 10-3 last year, or 9-4. So you're gonna have those seasons at Tennessee. If you look at the history of Tennessee football. Or Kentucky, if you look at the history of Kentucky football, well, they're pretty much the same now, right? Kentucky and Tennessee, sort of the same type of history. But if
both have checkerboards,
look, I mean, look at it. It's 10-3 in 2021, 5-6 in 2020, 8-5 in 19, 10-3 in 18, 7-6 in 17, 7-6 in 16, 5-7 in 15, 5-7 in 14, 2-10 in 13 when Stoops took over. So you can say, hey, it's a steady build, but there's an 8-5 and a 5-6 in there amongst the two 10-3s. So is it a coincidence that the 10-3s are 4 years apart? I don't think so. Yeah. I think the offensive lines got built for 18 and for 21. And now he's going to have to build the offensive line for 23 and 24. And when he does, I think we're going to have to sit here and say, look, I think Tennessee has a legitimate shot, but you got to build that. And I don't think he's brought in the recruits to be able to build that on anything other than an every 3 or 4 year cycle. And that's what we're going to see. We're going to see the down cycling of coming off of that 10-3 last year.
Yeah. Hey, listen. We're going to go put in our tickets for under 7.5, and then we're going to go pray really hard that we beat them in week 2, because I'm also nervous about that game in week 2. So should we do it? Do I expect to lose that game? Absolutely not. For the record, I'm going to be very on both sides of that argument there, but at the same time, boy, we better not lose that Kentucky game in week 2. LSU over 7 wins, plus 100, under 7 wins, minus 120. Will, we just went through the LSU schedule before. Over 7 wins at plus 100. I love this pick for LSU. I know everybody likes to make fun of Brian Kelly and his accent, and I'm no Brian Kelly fan, but I think he significantly improves this roster. I think this team will play a lot more organized. I think similar issues to Florida the last couple of years. Sloppy play, sloppy pursuit. I think the coaching is going to tighten up a lot. I think this LSU team, they very well may be undefeated coming into Gainesville. I very much think they have a solid shot at going 6-0 coming into Gainesville. So if you're giving me the over-under at 7, I'm all about it. I'm all about it. No room to slip up in September. No room to slip up early. But I think they get 8 or 9 wins fairly easily here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll buy your argument on that. I think LSU is going to be pretty good. I think we always think LSU is going to be pretty good. In the last few years, they've looked disorganized. So just fixing that, I think, is going to be a step up. And quite honestly, you could sort of tell they needed a change of scenery from Orgeron, and they're getting that. And so, we'll see. I think the long-term sustainability is the question, but the short-term ability to turn it around, I think, is probably pretty good. So, yeah, I expect them to hit the over.
All right, my Mississippi State Bulldogs, I'm adopting them for the season just out of spite to Will. Just because they got to pull me a big upset. I called a big upset. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it here from you, Mississippi State. Over under at 6.5. The over is minus 130, and the under at 6.5 is plus 110. Solid number here, because you walk through the schedule and this is my problem with Mike Leach in Mississippi State in general. Your first 2 games are Memphis and Arizona. Can you tell me for sure that Mississippi State's going to win both of those games?
Nope.
I can't. That being said, they're going to upset somebody. They're going to upset somebody. But over under at 6.5. Mike Leach making a lot of money to make a bowl game here. Will, you do have some other pretty winnable games on the schedule here. ETSU, for example, Bowling Green, Memphis, and Arizona. I don't think you lose both of those games. I think you go 3-1 in the non-conference. So can you find 4 wins in the SEC? I think that's a tough chore. I think that might be a tough chore this year for Mississippi State overall. However, just for the sake of saying that upset, I think that upset win that they're going to pull November 12th over Georgia gets them to 7 wins. Let's call it over on Mississippi State.
Yeah, you keep picking that, and I keep hoping that you're right, but I don't have a lot of faith in what they're going to be able to do. So you got LSU, Arizona, and A&M in that first month. Arkansas, who I'm a little bit low on. Kentucky, who I'm a little bit low on. But then Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, then East Tennessee State, and then Ole Miss. I'm seeing like a 4-win season here, man. I got way under on this. I am not a Will Rogers disciple. I don't think that that's effective against good teams. And quite honestly, I think a lot of teams in the SEC have gotten better. And I'm not sure that Mississippi State is one of them. So I look at it and go, it's one more year with the same quarterback, but we've kind of gotten the same story out of him the last few years. And look, I mean, they were able to beat LSU a couple of years ago, and we're like, whoa, look at that. And then it turns out LSU wasn't any good. So go list to me the quality SEC wins that Mike Leach has since he's gotten to the SEC when you look at how those teams performed at the end of the year. And that'll tell you why I'm taking the under.
They beat A&M last year on the road.
There you go. 1.
I agree with the I think it's going to be a tough number for this team to hit at 6.5. I do think they'll pull an upset along the way. I'm going to stand by that take. I'm going to die with that take. So until November 12th, you can't tell me I'm wrong on that. And then at that point, I'll just shift and consider the Ole Miss win a huge game. So if they can beat Ole Miss, there you go. But I'll start driving the Will Rogers hype train when he comes out against Memphis and throws for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns.
He'll throw for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. Just take him 79 throws to get there.
Doesn't matter how you do it, man. It's all about the result. It's all about the result.
It kind of does.
All right, Mizzou. This is a little bit. This one here is interesting. Here, Mizzou over under 5.5 wins, plus 100 for the over, minus 120. I mean, without even looking at their schedule here, without getting into it, over under 5.5 at plus 100. This seems like a nice bet to throw down. Louisiana Tech at Kansas State, Abilene Christian at Auburn, and then you got Georgia at Florida Vanderbilt, at South Carolina, Kentucky, at Tennessee, New Mexico State, and Arkansas. Will, New Mexico State, Abilene Christian, Louisiana Tech. That's 3 wins right there. We agree with that?
Right, and Vanderbilt.
Vandy gets you to 4. Can you find 2 wins on the rest of the schedule? I think you can. I think this is an easy over at 5.5, and that might be a nice bet. That might be one of my favorite bets on here. Mizzou over 5.5.
Well, just because they're going to luck into 1 or 2 there along the way, but
yeah.
And they don't have any of the beasts, right? I mean, they got Georgia on the schedule, but it's at Auburn on the other side, and then
who might be bad this year,
and versus Arkansas, right? And I think Auburn's going to be better and Arkansas is going to be worse. I think you think Arkansas is going to be better and Auburn's going to be worse. But one of those teams isn't going to perform very well, and so they don't have Alabama or A&M. I guess is the point on the other side of the schedule. Not over, easy over.
Easy. And that's plus 100. That's
easy over from the standpoint of I can't see them not getting to 6, but I can absolutely see them not getting to 7.
If I were, I would have expected that number to be more at 6. 6.5 would have been tougher, but 5.5 get to 6. Mizzou get to 6. I think so. As much as I don't like to admit it, Eli Drinkwitz. Ole Miss here. Ole Miss over under 7.5. You got Ole Miss coming in here with the over at minus 130 and the under at plus 110. The Rebs here coming off a nice season with Matt Corral, Lane Kiffin. They open with Troy, Central Arkansas. They go to Bobby Dodd Stadium to face Georgia Tech and Tulsa in September. We seeing a loss on that schedule so far?
Maybe Kentucky.
No, I'm saying Kentucky's their next game, but in September, that's a 4-0 September, right?
Well, so they've got Troy, Central Arkansas, and Georgia Tech
on the road, and then you got to
and
come
then
home with
Tulsa.
Tulsa.
Okay, yeah, 4-0, 4-0.
That's a
Okay,
4-0 September right there. So can you find me 4 more wins? So you got Kentucky at Vandy, Auburn at LSU, at Texas A&M, Alabama at Arkansas, and versus Mississippi State. Whew. That is a stretch. Does anybody in America have that stretch right there?
Yeah, I'm going under.
Brutal.
I just saw the schedule. I'm going under. That's a rough one.
You know, I do think you got Mississippi State at home. Arkansas, Ole Miss, I'm going to put in the same category. They can play with the A&Ms of the world still. I think you can get Auburn, Kentucky, and Vandy. I think Kentucky's a battle. Vandy's a win. So I think you get to 5 pretty easy. Kentucky, Auburn, and Mississippi State, but you can't slip up in those to get to 8. And then maybe you pull an upset along the way, LSU, Alabama. I'm going to take the over. I am going to take the over with Ole Miss, but that is a brutal back half of the schedule there. So
right, I'm going under. By the way, we are going to revisit this at the end of the year because this is going to be fun to see how we wound up being really, really wrong.
I also want to revisit this next to our actual predictions because I know I did not look at my actual predictions in the magazine here, and I'm just kind of going through looking at the schedules right now too. But we got some transfer portal action since we did the magazine, so it's a different ball game here. All right, over under 6 wins for South Carolina plus 115. The under at 6 is plus 135. You open with Georgia State at Arkansas, Georgia, and Charlotte in September. I hate that for this team. Georgia State, of course, they're a program. They went into Knoxville. They beat Tennessee a few years ago. Maybe not relevant, but I'd just like to remind folks of that. But at Arkansas, I hate that matchup for them. I hate the Georgia game, obviously. Charlotte should be a W. You got South Carolina State coming into town, and at Kentucky. If you went 3-3 in this opening stretch, or 4-2 would be a major win for South Carolina in that opening stretch of 6 games. But then you got a bye week. You come back off the bye week. You got Texas A&M rolling into Williams-Brice Stadium. And I'll tell you what, man, I'm not a big Aggies guy, not a big Jimbo guy, but my cousin at South Carolina here, shout out to Cam, he likes to point out that A&M is going to be coming off the Alabama game. Now, they get a bye week too before they come here, but they might have used a lot of energy on that Alabama game that might exceed the bye week. I'm not buying it as upset potential, but you got Mizzou at Vandy, at Florida, Tennessee, at Clemson. I hate this back half of the schedule. I think South Carolina was a feel-good story last season because nobody expected a thing out of Shane Beamer in year 1, and to get to the bowl game and win it was a great story. I'm on an under on this one. I don't care that you got Rattler this year. I'm taking the under 6 at minus 135. Will.
Yeah, I mean, so we need to look at that schedule. So they went 7-6 last year. They beat East Carolina 20-17.
Close. Yeah.
They beat Troy 23-14. They beat Vanderbilt 21-20.
Now they were rolling out with a dude named Zeb, though.
Oh, sure.
Now you got Spencer Rattler, who was the preseason Heisman favorite last year. I know he flamed out at Oklahoma, but he did get beat out by Caleb Williams, who a lot of people think is basically the preseason Heisman favorite this year. So it's not like he lost out to some bum. Well, it's a big improvement for South Carolina, the QB position.
But the question I have then is they lost to Clemson 30-0. That wasn't a great Clemson team.
Yeah.
They lost to A&M 44-14. They lost to Tennessee 45-20. They lost to Georgia 40-13. So when we look at any of the good programs they're going to play, I think there's a 30-point deficit they have to make up. Now, how good is Arkansas going to be? I think they're better than South Carolina. You look at Kentucky, I think they're probably better than South Carolina. A&M probably better. I think Missouri's probably a toss-up. Vanderbilt's going to have to snipe somebody at some point. This is them on the road at Vanderbilt. Yeah. Florida's going to be ticked about losing that game last year. I don't think they come out.
They're not touching us this year.
I don't think they come out there. And then you got Tennessee and Clemson. I'm taking the under here. I think 7-6 is a great story for Beamer's first year. A lot of 1-score games. They didn't all go their way, but a series of them did. And when you look at their actual point differential, they were a lot worse than they actually gave up more points than they scored, which means 7-6 means they had an awful lot of luck.
Mhm.
And so I think the luck's going to run out this year. And, the idea that you're going to see a team that's worse than 6-6, I think is probably something you can mark down.
It's why I do think they'll be worse record-wise, but I think they're going to be a more entertaining brand of football to watch. I think
Sure.
the offense is going to be I'm very excited to see what that offense looks like up in South Carolina this year. Let's go to Tennessee. Over under 7.5. You got -160 on the over, +135 on the under. People love their Tennessee this offseason. It's a lot of Tennessee talk this offseason. Ball State to open at Pitt, Akron, and Florida. I'll tell you what, if you beat Pitt and you're 3-0 rolling in that Florida game, Will, that says something. But here's the thing. If you don't beat Pitt and Florida does what they've done 16 out of the last 17 years, you're 2-2 heading into at LSU and versus Alabama. And then you got UT Martin, Kentucky, at Georgia, Missouri, at South Carolina, and Vandy to finish the season. Now, Missouri, South Carolina, Vandy, you think they're going to rack up 3 wins there? I'll give you Akron and Ball State, but I'm not handing over Missouri for free. I'm not handing over Kentucky. UT Martin, I'll give you UT Martin. I think you get to 6, so can you find 2 other wins in there? I actually think 7.5 is a really good number to debate here. I'm going to go under though with this team because I think there's a lot of hype around them, and I'm not going to jump on that Tennessee's definitively beating Kentucky this year or definitively beating Missouri at home. I think they'll drop a stupid game here or there.
Yeah, I'm actually taking the over because I've got Kentucky, Missouri, and South Carolina all hitting the under. I don't think Vanderbilt's that good. And so then you start figuring in Ball State, Akron, and UT Martin. You're already at 7, right?
Oh yeah. 7.
And so then the question is, can you take out Pitt? Can you take out Florida? Can you take out LSU? Could you take out Georgia conceivably? I think they probably get one of those. I think 8-4 is sort of where I expect them to end up. And again, I mentioned earlier when we were doing the value bets that if Hooker turns out to be great and if the defense can improve, I think they have an opportunity to be pretty good. Same thing with Florida. I think Florida's sitting in that 7-5, 8-4 range. And then if Anthony Richardson turns out to be really, really good, then they can conceivably be 9-3, 10-2, and potentially even push Georgia. And I think those are the 2 teams I'm looking at in the East. And so, yeah, I think Tennessee is going to be up there, and that game, September 24th, Florida, Tennessee, I think is going to go a long way towards determining which one of these teams. I think they both hit the over. The question is, can which one's 7-5, which one's 9-3, and I think that September 24th game with Florida is going to go a long way.
I hate that I actually agree with your logic on that. I really do. I don't like it. I'm going to take the under and be stubborn anyway about it. Texas A&M over under 8.5. The over is -150. The under is +130. You open up here. So 8.5 here. Sam Houston State, Appalachian State, Miami, and Arkansas is that neutral field game they do in Jerry World out of Dallas. Now, you lost that Arkansas game last year. The quarterback situation, you're going to be breaking in a new quarterback here. I have to think it's going to be significantly improved. Are you worried at all about any stumbling against Miami or Arkansas in September, Will?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I am, because that's been the consistent sort of state of the program, right? I mean, it's the only year where they haven't had those issues is 2020, when there wasn't anybody in the stands except at Kyle Field, right? Where they filled that place up and gave themselves a significant.
Yeah, Mullen was all about it.
Yeah, Mullen didn't like that much. Now, look, I mean, you've got Sam Houston, Appalachian State, and then you've got UMass. So you're already at 3.
Yeah.
Right.
Later so now on the schedule.
So I don't think South Carolina is going to be that good. I don't think Mississippi State's going to be that good. I don't think Ole Miss is really going to be that good. So now you're at 6. So now you're at Auburn. You've got LSU. Then you've got Alabama, and then Arkansas and Miami. Are you going to be able to get 2 of those? I think so. I think they probably end up with 9 wins. I'd take the over on this one. But again, I think this is one of those where you think about boom or bust. There's an opportunity here for things to go bad, really bad, if it turns out that they can't find a solution at quarterback. And we saw last year, right, where Haynes King was going to be the starter, gets injured real early. Calzada takes over and was incredibly inconsistent. Calzada may turn out to be a very good quarterback, but the problem is that you get thrust into that role, and the inconsistency kills you over the course of an SEC season. I think you might see that again, depending upon who plays quarterback. Certainly, I don't think Max Johnson is going to be a guy who's going to lead them to 9 or 10 wins. So, maybe they figure that maybe the defense has gotten good enough at this point that they're going to be able to sort of coast, but that's not Jimbo's MO. He wants to score some points, and, maybe he finds his quarterback who can turn this thing around and they end up elite. I think they do have a high ceiling. I don't know that they have that low of a floor. I think 8-4, 9-3 is probably where they're going to sit. So I take the over.
Miami's been the feel good story of the offseason, arguably across the country here. It'd be kind of sweet to see them walk into Kyle Field and get smoked by 3 touchdowns on September 17th. That would be a lot of fun to watch.
But it turns out you can't buy the win against A&M. So,
well, yeah, those folks up there in the boxes, they sure pay a lot of money. See that clip? All right, here's another bet here. Will, this might be the most fun one to debate that we've done yet. Vanderbilt over under 2.5 wins for the Commodores. No love for Clark Lee. Over plus 120 over 2.5. And the under is minus 140. Without looking, I'm taking the over. Without looking. You got a road trip to Hawaii to open the season. That's a W if I've ever seen it for Vanderbilt. You come home to Elon, that's another W right there. So you got the rest of the season to collect on this money, Will. Wake Forest is coming to town at NIU. You're cashing this check by the end of September, Will. 3-1 going into October, no problem. But then it gets real. At Alabama, Ole Miss, at Georgia, at Missouri, South Carolina, at Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee. So give me 2 wins in the non-con against Hawaii, Elon. You're not beating Wake, and NIU. Give me 2 wins in that mix, and then just pull 1 upset. That's all I ask, Vandy. 3-9. Let's do it.
Well, I mean, so it's interesting because since 2011, when James Franklin came to Vanderbilt, they've won less than 3 games only twice. And once was the 2022 season where it was all SEC that got Derek Mason fired. And it was 2-10 last year with Clark Lee. Right. And obviously you had to take your lumps that first year and you're sitting there going, okay, like this is not a good team. And the offense was terrible and the defense was terrible. And you're going to have to turn all those things around. But the good news is you have the ability to do that. Look, they lost to East Tennessee State last year, 23-3.
Maybe I shouldn't be writing off Elon.
Or
Hawaii.
They beat Colorado State 24-21. They lost, but then towards the end of the season, lost to South Carolina 21-20. They did lose to Mississippi State 45-6, but then they lost to Missouri 37-28, Kentucky 34-17, Ole Miss 31-17, and Tennessee 45-21. So this was a team that after its 42-0 loss to Florida did start to put some things together. Do I think they're going to be great? No, I don't. But I think they're heading in the right direction under Clark Lee. And I think if you look at, like, we think of Vanderbilt as the dregs of the SEC, and rightly so. But, you think about like 1995, 2-9, 96, 2-9, 97, 3-8, 98, 2-9. That's who we think of in terms of Vanderbilt, or under Bobby Johnson, 2-10, 2-10, 2-9, 5-6, 4-8, 5-7, 7-6. Oh my God. Oh, then 2-10 and 2-10. Like that has been that was Vanderbilt until about 2011. 2011, James Franklin sort of put a blueprint there to at least put a respectable team on the field. Derek Mason was able to do that most of the time. And now I think Clark Lee's building back to that. So I think, Vanderbilt is getting to a place where you're not just going to be able to pencil them in as a win a year or 2 from now. Yeah. And so, look, I think they're going to struggle this year. I don't think they're going 6-6, but to have them at 2.5, I think that's pretty easy over.
Now I'll put a little asterisk on this because I want to see another recruiting class like I did last year, because you and I have been excited about this Vandy program with Clark Lee because they brought in Barton Simmons to be the GM. We thought they were going to take an interesting approach in recruiting. They seem to be doing exactly that. Where did they finish in the team rankings last year? In the 30s?
Somewhere in that range, yeah.
Like number 14 in the SEC, but you're talking about 30th, 32nd nationally. That's a good team. It's good. It's a good building block right there.
32nd.
32nd nationally for Vanderbilt last year. So,
ahead of Utah.
Good perspective.
Ahead of Virginia Tech, ahead of Baylor, ahead of Purdue, ahead of Ohio, right. Iowa State, Boston College, Nebraska, Cincinnati, and Texas Tech.
Yeah, and Wisconsin. Baylor won their conference. Utah won their conference. Vanderbilt's finishing ahead of them here in the recruiting. So I do think this is going to be a slow build, though. And if Vandy gives Clark Lee time, this could be a Kentucky Mark Stoops situation where you might not have that record on the field for a few years, but if you give him about 4 or 5 years, I do think this could be an interesting thing where you're making bowl games on a consistent basis. And why shouldn't Vanderbilt in the middle of Nashville? Why are they shouldn't be so putrid? About time. You're in the SEC. You got all the advantages you can ever have. You're a great school. Get it together, man. It's pretty bad that's even at this point right now. But I think that there's a lot to sell there and make the thing the Stanford of the East. I know that's always been the vision. They've never been able to execute, but Northwestern gets it done in the Big Ten. That's why I think a Northwestern type program out of Vandy is very realistic.
Well, and I think they're going to be able to get it done from the standpoint of now, we spent an hour talking about the super conferences. Well, Vanderbilt's going to be part of that. And so if you're a recruit thinking about what's going to come in 2025 and 2026 and 2027, one of the things you can sell is come to Vanderbilt and be part of the new college football when it comes and develops. I guarantee you that there are going to be people who will say, look, I can go to Vanderbilt or I can go to Stanford, or I can go to Vanderbilt or I can go to Duke. And they're going to sit there and go, well, look, I'm going to get the same education, but I'm going to have an opportunity to play in one of these super conferences. And it'll be guaranteed. So I'm going to go there. And that to me is a huge recruiting tool. So yeah, look, I mean, Hawaii, Elon, and Northern Illinois.
Hit 2 of those.
Along with Wake Forest. They should hit 2.5 easy.
So we're both over on Vandy. I think my 2 favorite bets that would be the most fun to watch this year, over 2.5 on Vandy and over 5.5 on Mizzou. Let's go.
Except I don't want to root for Mizzou, so I'm not making that bet.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good one, though. All right. Extra long episode today, but this extra long because we had a lot to talk about. I love preseason college football and going through, and no doubt we're going to be incredibly wrong on a lot of these picks this year, and I look forward to talking about that. So hopefully we'll make fun of ourselves with the Tennessee at over 7.5, though. That's my main hope for this offseason.
Speak for yourself. I think I'm going to be spot on, and we'll come back and revisit at the end of the year.
Good. I like that. Double down on it. Double down right now. All right. That's all we got for tonight. Will, any final words before we head out?
Nah, just if you're interested in the preseason mag, go over to readingreaction.com/MAG. And all of these Stand Up and Holler episodes and all of the stuff that we put on the YouTube channel is over at our Patreon channel, readingreaction.com/Patreon, commercial free. So if you want to head over there and check that out, support us, help us generate content. One of the things we've been talking about, what else can we generate and put over there? But one of the things we do put over there is these things commercial free. So if you want to listen to those straight through without any interruptions, head over there. A little as $2 a month, you can support us and get all this stuff commercial free.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Stand Up and Holler. Have a great week and go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.